Hello, welcome to this meeting of the Cabinet of Portsmouth City Council. Just quick housekeeping. Jason, do you want to come and join us as you're presenting? Yeah. So, just housekeeping things. There's no fire alarm schedule, so if there is one, it's real, and we meet by Queen Victoria. This is live streamed, so welcome. Judith and Rob, they'll see your back, and because the camera's just behind you, you can wave to our audience. Can everybody use the mics? We've got a couple of deputations today, but let's just go around the table to people say who they are. David, do you want to start?
David Williams, Chief Executive.
Dominique Latouze, Consultant in Public Health.
Chris Ward, Director of Finance.
Hayley Trower, Air Quality Lead for Transport.
Anne Turton, Assistant Director of Transport.
Richard Lee, responsible for monitoring air quality.
Jason Horsey, Director of Public Health.
Joanne Wildsmith, Democratic Services.
Gerald Van Jackson, Leader of the Council and Chair of this meeting.
Rob Wood, Cabinet Member for Children and Families.
Dave Ashmore, Cabinet Member for Environment and Climate Change.
Matthew Williamson, Cabinet Member for Health, Wellbeing and Social Care.
Darren Sanders, Cabinet Member for Housing.
Tom Wood, Cabinet Member for Resources.
Okay, and I've got apologies from Lee Hunt, Susie Horton, Lynn Stagg and Steve Pitt. A couple of them ill, one because they're at work and one because they've got a family issue they have to deal with. Okay, any declarations of interest, colleagues? Matt?
Not a declaration as such, but it is my nephew's 6th birthday today, so I wish him very happy birthday. Theo.
To the many millions who will be watching, I'm sure that is interesting. Okay, so we have two deputations from Judith and Rod. Judith, do you want to go first, or second, or third?
Rod Bailey, happy to go first.
Always
I just want to say before I started that members may know that I've injured my leg, and if I'm squirming about or standing up, it's because sitting down is the most difficult thing to do.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Judith, do you want to stand or whatever? No, whatever's most comfortable.
I just want to be able to move about without you all wondering what I'm doing.
Do, absolutely. Yes. Okay, Rod, welcome. The floor is yours. I think the rule is 6 minutes, but it's yours for that period.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for coming, Rod.
Thank you. I'm Rod Bailey. I'm Chair of the Milton Neighbourhood Planning Forum. We're trying to plan for sustainable development in Milton for the next 15 years. In Milton is Air Quality Management Area 9. Air Quality Management Area 9 is just about compliant as it is. What we are here today, we haven't had a chat really, but we're here today to approve a small area Class B clean air zone, a Class B charging clean air zone. This is a monster of a pack. It's about 800 pages. I haven't read it all. I couldn't read it all, but I read some of it. What I'm bothered about and why I'm making this deputation is this is a public health issue, and I believe that a small area clean air zone doesn't quite do the job. I'll explain why. In the clean air zone charging data that you provided here, we've got evidence that suggests that a D-class charge would reduce pollution levels by significant amounts. I think for commercial road it's something like 34%. For our area down in Milton it's even higher, it's 51%. For London Road, London Road isn't actually covered, What we're doing with a small area zone is excluding London Road because we're coming down Kingston Crescent, down Fratton Road, and then round towards Old Portsmouth, and we're including Commercial Road and Alfred Road. And yet Air Quality Management Area 6, which is London Road, already's got readings of 44 micrograms per cubic metre. That's significantly above the 40. Even if we were to do a Class B, according to the outline business case, if we were to do the Class B, that reduction would only be a 5%. Okay? That would take it down to 41.8 micrograms per cubic metre. But we're not doing it, are we? We are concentrating in a small part of Portsea Island because it seems to me that DEFRA have required a targeted feasibility study in the southwestern corner. But what will happen, according to reading these papers, what's likely to happen, and likely is a significant word here, because what we're trying to do is to achieve compliance with legal air quality objectives in the shortest possible time by the means most likely to achieve it. Okay? So what's likely to happen by having a small area charging zone, and it's likely to happen because your outline business case actually says so, is that many people will avoid the clean air zone. Now for me and us at trying to do a neighbourhood plan for Milton, the risk, which is significant, is that the traffic, particularly cars, and now we've got more HGVs, would come down the Eastern Road along Velder Avenue into Milton Road and into Eastney Road. According to the annual status report for 2019, Velder Avenue, Eastern Road, Milton Road and Eastney Road, the pollution levels are rising. It isn't clear to me why the council has faith in other means, the non-charging means, of reducing the pollution levels. And the reason is this. Since about 2001, the Portsmouth Plan has aimed to reduce car dependency, something like 2/3 by 2020. It hasn't done so. The 2006 supplementary planning document talks about development and mitigating air pollution. It clearly hasn't done so. And in 2012, the Portsmouth Plan aims to achieve integrated sustainable transport. It hasn't managed to do so. These factors are outside our control, but the local authority has a responsibility to try and do this. Now, what you seem to be doing is modelling as well. You're modelling predictions on reducing pollution levels, but your own outline business court case actually says that modelling can only be used as a tool. And as a tool, it's dependent on the conditions that go into it. Now, you also say that the car registrations between 2009 and 2018 have gone up about 15%. You talk about a 4% traffic growth between 2018 and 2022, whereas the Transport, Environment and Scrutiny Panel of 3rd of November 2016,
Rod,
that's only 3 years ago.
You've hit your time limit. Do you want to just draw it to a close?
Okay, well that's producing or predicting increases in traffic by 41%. You've got inconsistent data, you've got modelling that's dependent on accurate data, and at best is a predictable.
Yep.
It doesn't cut it. There's too many risks. This is a public health risk. Well, can I summarise it as this then? There is in environmental law a principle called the precautionary principle. And that is, unless there's scientific evidence to actually prove that a means of dealing with a public health issue that could cause public harm, unless there's scientific evidence to say that it could dispose of that harm, you take the precautionary approach and don't go ahead with it. And there's too much inconsistencies in this, I'm sorry.
Okay, thanks very much,
I
Rod.
needed longer, but
That's right.
thank you.
Thank you. Judith.
Thank you,
Welcome.
Cabinet, and thank you, Rod, because I've cut out a bit of my speech that was covering exactly the same ground as a result of what you said. I think the report is superb. I think it leads us to a different conclusion. We in the Labour Party fully support the zone, but we think it's too small and is therefore not going to work. In particular, it's an enormous effort to introduce such a small zone, and it means it cannot be value for money. There'll be displacement to surrounding areas. It's easy to drive around it. I know that when we come onto the M275 to get down to Southsea, we face 2 or 3 choices, and we can often make a choice that avoids going through the zone. There'll be displacement to surrounding areas, so that's which is important, and those are the areas that are the worst, and those are that are already bad enough to justify a zone themselves. They're the areas where our schools are as well, coincidentally. They're not concentrated in the city centre, as in many towns. They're concentrated on the routes where displaced traffic will go, like AQ Area 6. It leaves hotspots, just as Rod has mentioned, with very little less than the figures show that they need a zone just as badly. Why you're not tackling these at the same time? It goes against, it multiplies the opportunities for arguments with the few, I believe it is a few, businesses and citizens left in the city who don't care about climate change, or who don't care about it because their children aren't living here and their relations. And it contributes to, it doesn't do enough to contribute to raising Portsmouth up the league tables. And by the time we're ready to implement this, I believe technical advice and standards will have overtaken it. I think it's a gross betrayal of the citizens of Portsmouth to leave us with so much effort going into such a small zone. I urge you to grasp the nettle and to be more ambitious. Even if there is some change in the time, which is relied on quite a lot, to less polluting vehicles, just in the natural turnover of vehicles, it still is going to lead to that problem. I do think this report is I have read it all. It's really good and it's really compelling, but it compels me towards wanting a whole island zone. What's needed in our overcrowded island city is a whole zone. This will in turn will help to ease other traffic problems and encourage people to walk, cycle and use buses. It'll make it much easier for you, the Cabinet, to have a comprehensive traffic and transport strategy, which I believe Lynn is working on now, that will make sense. I think this could become a real obstacle in her producing a understandable and comprehensible proposition, this little zone. I don't want to find us here in 2 years when this tiny scheme is implemented, of having to take the obvious steps of then extending it. I want to avoid disproportionate argument and petty discussions about such a tiny, ineffective zone. I also, on previous occasions when we've argued about this sort of thing, I want us to be able to make a decision today completely separated from what else we're doing about carbon change. I know we're doing a lot about that. The City Council as an organisation has a low carbon footprint. I know that we've got lots of things in the pipeline, generally on the carbon and climate change initiative. Those aren't arguments. I know when in the 9th of September debate, you brought up all those things rather than actually tackling the evidence in front of us, which is that we need a whole city air zone. So I'm not going to go there, but let's not have endless bits of debate as you did on the 9th of September about other things that are not to do with this important issue. We know how difficult it is to reduce car ownership, but this would actually help Councillor Stagg in her efforts to reduce car ownership across the town and to reduce car usage. This would be a positive step in terms of the overall strategy across the city. We know all about blaming central government. That was also brought up when you debated this on the 9th of September. And I think we just need for once to recognise that children and adults are suffering from air pollution, and that just for having such a tiny zone won't help us to become the green, clean air place that we all want to live in. You know, even if you, oddly enough, where the zone you've chosen is rather short on the sort of dangerous places to live, which are the main roads where people are living right on the street at the level of the polluting vehicle. It's those people who have to travel in and out of the city centre using a buggy. The statistics are clear that people are using accident emergency and the NHS generally more for pulmonary and respiratory diseases, and that at least some of those are attributable to air quality. Having a new grandchild and perhaps having a bad leg has particularly affected me. I couldn't bear the idea of my granddaughter suffering breathing difficulties and having to wake up with her in the middle of the night on the nights we look after her, and taking her to A&E because she can't breathe. What an agony for parents, for grandparents, for families. And also when you consider the long-term damage that does to little babies' organs as they're growing. There is now quite a lot of medical evidence that we just have to do more. So I can't believe...
Judith, you've hit your time.
Okay. I can't believe that you're thinking of doing something so footling, particularly when your own party has identified environmental concerns as its second main policy concern out of two. We must do something brave and ambitious. You really need to be strengthened by the technical advice you've had here, and grasp the nettle and go for the whole things, particularly as it's 2 years to consult and 2 years to develop the ideas. Let's develop the big ideas. If you have to retreat at that stage and there's obvious reason to do it, then retreat. But surely not this tiny little thing now.
Okay. Thank you very much, Judith. Thank you. Jason, as this is your report, do you want to introduce it?
Yeah, so taking
Sorry, Chair, can I just ask one thing? If that's okay, with Jason's help, as he's going to introduce this?
Shall we let him introduce it first and let's come to questions when he's done so? Jason, leap in.
Okay. First, I'd like to say this is, as has been partly pointed out in the deputations, this is a response that we have to make. It's very important that we respond within the legal timeframes that we have to respond by, and that we have to respond in the way that we have done in this proposed document before you. Those are basically to meet stipulations set out by DEFRA, the Joint Air Quality Unit, and the government in how we must form our response and how we have to do the monitoring and the modelling. It is heavily based on modelling, and I definitely share the concerns of others about, all models are wrong, some are useful, because inevitably computer modelling is never going to be able to capture all of the different things that can happen. What this allows us to do is to respond to JACU in keeping with the limits that have been set by government on what we have to do to meet the directive in the shortest possible time and with the least external impacts on others. So that's what this report presented to you does. There is always a chance that the modelling is wrong and that we come back in 2 years' time and find that we haven't necessarily met the targets stipulated. That is certainly a risk. There's also a difficulty involved in modelling some of the areas around other actions which are in the plan, and this model can't capture all of the other things that we want to do to improve the city's health and well-being and the other ambitions that we've got. So with that sort of very cautious introduction to it, I'll say that this is very important that we do submit this by the end of this week, and that we have it laid out in the format that it currently is, because that allows us to meet those requirements set out by central government.
Okay, thank you. Rob, you had a question?
You've actually addressed it. What I want to do, because I've listened to what both the deputations have said, and obviously I have the responsibility for children and families, and I'm taking totally seriously what's being asked about what we're trying to do, which is the ambition, first of all, is at the end of the day, when we implement this, is different from what we need to do to make sure we meet government compliance to get this off the ground. So setting something out in this report that may be questionable is not what we're trying to do. We're trying to set out what we can do, and therefore that does not say what our ambition is. So from the public health side of things, given what you've just heard about the impact on young children, families, etc. in the city, how would you respond to that? I know you've started, but you are responsible for public health.
So from that point of view, I think this report and the actions within it allow us to fulfil our legal obligations, and that means the legal obligations to respond as we have done to the government, but also the legal obligations, we hope, to bring air quality under the 40 microgram limits set by the EU and by the government. As we've said on a number of occasions, in the work that we've presented to both citizens and to various cross-party working groups, if we can go further than that and we can reduce the air pollution by greater than that, we will do more health benefit. We will incur more health benefits as a city. And if we can get people out of private vehicles and out of cars and more using public transport and active transport modes, there's a huge health dividend to be gained through that as well. And we can do that without necessarily destroying our local economy. So those are the challenges that we want to meet, and the ambitions we need to set ourselves as a city.
Richard, could I ask, just before we go on, one of the things that Rod said was around air pollution rising in the city. I know this is all based on modelling, but in the real stuff that we're looking at, is air pollution rising or falling around the city?
Rod made reference to the Balder Avenue corridor coming into the city, and he would be right. If we look at the annual status report, there has been an increase when we compare that between 2017 and 2018. The increase was very small, around about 7.41%. That's what the report is telling me. In terms of across the city, I think it would be unfair to say that there has been a deterioration across the entire city. There are a number of hotspots, and Rod is again correct in saying that one of the hotspots in London Road is outside the proposed location or the geographical extent of the clean air zone that's being proposed today. So in conclusion, I would say there are a number of areas in the city where air quality is deteriorating, but likewise there are a number of areas where air quality is improving.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, just to start this off then, I think my understanding of what we're asked to do is to respond to the government's imposition of this on the city in a way that meets their legally defined way of doing things. And I'm pleased we've done that. It is all based on modelling, not based on reality. But that's just what government are expecting us to do, and that's what we have to do. Personally, I'm really pleased that we've got recommendation 6 that notes the proposals in the plan are a small part of the wider work of the Council in undertaking to address air pollution and climate change in the city, particularly in relation to public transport improvements through the Transforming Cities bid. My real worry with this is that this is a half-baked proposal imposed by government that actually doesn't address the real issue. And I'm pleased that we've responded in the way that we have because we have to. but it seems to me that there is way more work that needs to happen in terms of air pollution, and the government doesn't recognise that at all. This is unjoined up. This is in the terms of the government's proposals and the way in which they've pushed this. It's unambitious, unjoined up, ill thought out, short term, and doesn't work. And yet we're having to do this because the government say it has. So for me, this is a sideshow. The real work we have to do on air pollution is a much bigger piece of work, and is a serious piece of work, while this is just having to fill in a form that the government has sent us. So I think that the way in which the government have looked at this is really poor. They've not reacted positively to any of our suggestions. So we've said to them, why don't you give everybody a bus pass to encourage people not to use private cars and to use the bus instead? Not interested from government. We've asked them to look at matching the investment in alternative means of transport, public transport, walking, bikes, etc., to match the investment they put into London, and they've not responded. They're not interested. And actually, London gets 11 times the amount of investment into sustainable transport that we get. We've asked them to look at funding transferring our taxi fleet to an electric fleet so it's not producing harmful emissions, and they've not responded, they've not been interested. So I think that's hugely disappointing in what government's done, and my thanks to the officers for working within the constraints that have been set for us, but I think it's a real problem, and I think it's so short-sighted. If we look at what they're doing, this is not about reducing air pollution. What they're doing is incentivising moving air pollution. So there's going to be an incentive for people not to shop or not to come into town centres, but to drive to out-of-town shopping centres because they're not in clean air zones. And therefore, because shops won't have to pay for the charges on their lorries for delivering in the out-of-town shopping centres, and that will again mean that there are that retail centres will be under stress, and people will lose their jobs. And the people who will lose their jobs and the people being inconvenienced are the people on the lowest incomes who will be hit again. And look at the issue of Whitelink. So people using the Whitelink, the lorries using the Whitelink ferry in Portsmouth going to the Isle of Wight will be hit by this charge if they're non-compliant, but if they go from Southampton or if they go from Lymington, they're not. So you're just moving it. So you're encouraging people to drive all the way through the New Forest to get to the Lymington car ferry, to get on there and then drive much further all the way across the Isle of Wight. So there'll be more air pollution, but it'll just not be in one place, it'll be somewhere else. And I think the government's proposals are really weak, really ill thought out. But we have to answer the exam question. Judith, I'm sorry, we've been doing so. Well, so I think I like the idea that we've got time to consult. I think there are things that we could and should do. One of my understanding is that air pollution levels at night are lower, and I'm wondering whether to support the shops and things like that, whether we can look at whether deliveries at night into commercial road, etc., can have an exception, because we don't want to drive the shops there out of business, even though the government seems keen to do so. So I'm personally, I think this is what the government have asked. We've answered the exam question. The exam question was wrong, but we've answered it. It needs to be more ambitious. And strangely, I know the Conservative view is that we shouldn't be doing this at all, and they think this is a rubbish thing to do. And we've heard from Judith that she thinks it should be a citywide thing. I think we're in the middle, and normally being at the middle as opposed to on the extremes is probably the right place to be. As in so many things in life. So that's my bit. I'm happy to propose it. I think this is, and my thanks to people who've worked ludicrously hard within this to get this sorted within the parameters that are set by government. So let's just see. Mr. Ashmore, I presume, as portfolio holder, you will want to, with responsibility, you will want to say.
You are correct in your assumption, Leader. Just to follow on from what you were saying, really, I think I've had a lot of social media talking about this. I've been a lot of correspondence about this, and it's almost like a distraction that this is about this proposed clean air zone, when in fact, that's, as it says on the recommendation, it's a small part of improving our air quality here. And as you've said about the exam question, Leader, it's like a government answer to a government question, and it doesn't address the long-term, sustainable ways of cleaning our air. It goes on about compliance, hitting compliance. Well, to me, that, if you're a clean air campaigner, do you really want to hit compliance, or do you want to actually smash those targets, or do you just want to be treading water and keeping the nose above water there? I think we need to do more, and I think this report, and it is a good report, it puts not just the clean air zone proposal, it explains everything in detail, explains all the other measures, the non-charging measures, and also the things that we're going to do, and things that we could do better. But the clean air zone itself, according to the modelling, whatever area, whatever size you've got it on, it hits it at the lowest, it hits compliance at the lowest time, which is what the government need to answer. But it addresses the NO2, the NOx emissions, but we need to be doing more than just hitting compliance. We need to, the clean air zone doesn't address things like the particulates in the air. It doesn't explain how we're going to get people out of private cars. It doesn't explain, how we can cope with traffic congestion. That would still be there. And we're attempting to get people to move to public transport, yet a clean air zone proposes charging public transport. We've put we've managed to do retrofitting of the buses. We want to put more into cycling. That's my big thing. I'd love to see more in the city, a joined up, perhaps segregated cycling infrastructure. We've asked the government for that. They're not interested. We've asked the government to help provide for electric vehicle fleet. They haven't really, their responses have been very bland. We want some long-term sustainable solutions, something that's actually going to get, people to change, this modal shift we keep talking about, to get a wholesale change, that people actually want to use public transport. The clean air zone is the stick, but we need the carrots as well. Otherwise, if you just put a charge on things, thinking it will dissuade people from using it, all it can do is really attack, the salaries, the wages of the less well-off, while the richer can just pay to pollute, which is obviously not what we should be trying to look at. And I know that putting up prices on things for people who can't afford it doesn't always work. I used to buy 20 cigarettes a day. The prices kept going up, I kept buying them. It just meant I had less to spend. It just annoyed me. But it didn't stop me smoking. It was vaping that come along, and that helped me wean me off, and many other people. So, if you're going to put the charge on cars, if you're going to, say we need less private car use, give them that alternative, give them that sustainable alternative, and that's what we want, and that's the ambition that we're lacking with Clean Air Zone, but that's the ambition that is in this report with the non-charging measures, and which we, as a council, really want to promote.
Can I just ask as well, Julia suggested a whole city zone, and could you, sorry? An island zone, okay. Just to make sure, in terms of how that would be funded, Pam, would you like to tell us how that might be funded?
Jackie have been quite clear that
who is Jackie?
The Joint Air Quality Unit, the recipients of this report, have been clear in that they won't fund a citywide or an island-wide zone if a smaller zone is shown to bring about compliance in the shortest possible time, and that is the case with this.
Okay, so if we wanted to do an island-wide one, how much would we therefore have to find to fund that?
Many millions.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. Okay, Matthew.
Thank you, Gerald, and thank you for asking that question, because that kicks me off. So I was actually going to read the bit of the report that actually says that, which is 5.7, and it says, however, JACU have confirmed that where a number of charging CAZs are shown to achieve compliance in the same year, funding will only be granted for the lowest class of CAZ that is shown to achieve compliance. Therefore, as classes B, C and D are all shown to achieve compliance by 2022, a Class B charging CAZ is being recommended as the preferred class of charging CAZ. And this really is the crux of the issue. This is something that was, I mentioned at the last Cabinet meeting back in September when we discussed this. This is a sticking plaster. This is effectively a massive distraction to everything else that's going on. And the thing about clean air zones is that the council, as long as they comply with what the government says, gets any money that comes from the clean air zone. So we would get double whammies if we did a island-wide clean air zone, because A, we'd have to pay to implement it, and then we have absolutely no guarantee whatsoever that the government would allow us to get the money that is raised from the clean air zone. We have no guarantee. In other places where councils have not been have not gone along with what the government said, the government have actually stopped councils from receiving monies where they haven't followed their guidance. So we run the risk of not only having millions of pounds worth of setting up a clean air zone if we went for citywide, because the government wouldn't pay for it, but we also run the risk of the government then turning around saying, we don't agree with this, we're not going to allow you, because of course this is a competency for a local council, we're not going to allow you to have the money that's raised from it either. So that puts us in a ridiculous situation. But let's get back to the fact that this is a distraction. Look at the size of this report. Look at that. Look at all the work that's had to be put into doing this, because the governments have decided with their modelling, which, as we've heard from our Director of Public Health, is interesting at best, is not reliable in terms of actual outcomes, doesn't, as the leader of the council say, doesn't particularly reflect reality. But we have to go through this entire palaver, look at modelling that keeps changing, so we keep getting different answers as time goes on. So originally we were looking at a larger clean air zone, that was a possibility. Then it's been done down to a B, because that's what the latest modelling says. So we then get stuck with, that's what we have to do, that's what we get funding for, and yet all this time we get nothing from government at all on the things we've actually asked for that would really help to improve air quality in the city. So again, I will go through again: converting all taxis to electric vehicles, free buses passes for all residents, new bus and tram services and a local bus depot, removal of government housing targets, working to support businesses, a car scrappage scheme, extra funding for cycling facilities. Nothing. Government has said, we're only interested in what we want, which is this sticking plaster, this sledgehammer of a clean air zone, rather than the things we, as local councillors, which has been agreed across, I do believe across at least some parties on the council, that these things are important. Actually, when we had that discussion at full council, I think every party agreed to this being sent to government, and the government came back with nothing. So what we've tried to do as a thing, because we've had nothing there, we've then included that in our clean air fund submission as well. But then that takes away from the distraction again of doing this report, takes away from all those other things we're doing. All the officer time that's gone into all of this to keep the government happy is stopping us from putting officer times into putting more electric vehicle charge points in, cycling initiatives and events, Stomp for Stamps, Clean Air Day, bus retrofit programme, public transport information, tree planting, the work on the climate emergency, on the Transforming City funds, on park and ride expansion, on the LC WIP, on future mobility zones, on getting that bus depot, changing attitudes to travel and personal mobility. All of our officers could have been spending more time on all of this, but instead, because the government doesn't really know what it's doing and has a very simplistic attitude to this, that we have to spend time on this, on providing a clean air zone which will not have anything long term. Because let's remember, as soon as you achieve compliance, your clean air zone goes. It's not there forever. And if you wanted to continue it, you would have to pay for it yourself. You would have to pay for the upkeep and maintenance of that. The government would cease funding. So this doesn't affect things for people at all. It's not what the people of the city wants. It's not that's come through in this city of way of doing things. And I speak as someone who has a particular stake in this air pollution, being asthmatic, and I have been since I grew up in the 1980s in an urban polluted area as well. So I completely agree with Councillor Smile in terms of she doesn't want her granddaughter growing up in a polluted city. But what I don't want to do is keep messing around, playing to the government's tune because they decide that one particular thing is going to help solve these issues, whereas as we know that all these other things are going to have a much more sustainable impact, are going to make a much greater difference in the long term, but we're being distracted all the time by having to react to what government says. So I completely support the report, but I'm really, really frustrated that we're even at this situation and that all this officer time has had to be put into something which is necessary because we're told it is, but is taking us away and is distracting us from all the other really good things that are already being done in the city and can be done in the future.
Okay, just before we get to that, Judith, you had a question, and I think and I would be interested if your proposal is an island-wide zone, and that the cost of it is many millions. I think we would be useful to hear from you how you're proposing to pay for that.
I have a question for you rather than an answer. I mean,
I'm very happy for you to provide both.
Okay. The question would be to have had a slightly more full financial analysis that showed the proportional difference between costing to do the whole island and doing the small zone, because it seems to me that the small zone is costing a lot for a very small gain. So some form of cost-benefit analysis that compared the two things would be useful. That was part of my question. The other question, the question I had before, was about the efforts you'd made to, which I'd read in the report, to try and persuade the government of something else. My question that remains from that, because that was helpful, is to see if there's any way you could strengthen your recommendations, because the strength of feeling that's come out from the speeches you've given today isn't quite mirrored in this report. I would like to question why you haven't got some stronger recommendations about future commitment to improving air quality across the whole island.
Well, personally, I think it's covered in. This is a technical report that we have to put in because the government says we have to do it in this way. So I think recommendation 6 is good and encompasses that, and I'm happy with that. I would be very interested, Judith, if you could come forward and let us know of the proposal. We've heard that the additional cost is many millions, and I'll look forward to hearing from you about how you would fund that, because the council would have to pick that up. There is a 12-week consultation period, and if you could let us know how you would be funding that within that time, then we could look at it when that consultation period is finished. That would be extremely helpful. Okay,
If I do that, I wouldn't be doing this job at the moment. But I do think some cost-benefit analysis that even might persuade the government that what they're spending money on this time would be useful.
But I think the government have been very clear what this is. Now, I don't think we should, as public representatives, be making commitments to do things without providing the funding. I know we shouldn't be in an era where we expect unicorns to be delivered to everybody by just saying things are possible without actually coming up with the real funding for it. So I'd look forward to your proposals from the Labour group about how that's going to be funded, to see that soon. And once we've got that, then we can look at that as a serious piece of work and to work to see what other things would have to be cut to fund that. Colleagues, we've got a series of recommendations here. Colleagues, are you happy with these recommendations? Yes. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, colleagues, for all the work you've done on this. We'll go to the next stage of this now. Thank you.